Now, I'm trying to develop something called animal standpoint theory, and it comes from a precedent, which is a feminist standpoint theory, which has other precedents in Marx and Hegel. The basic ideas of standpoint theory is the notion of writing history from below. That typically history has been written from the perspective of the winners rather than the losers, from the conquerors rather than the conquered. And what standpoint theory does is to write history from below and to look at history from the perspective of the so-called losers, of the so-called conquered, and the people who have been enslaved by slave masters, and to look at developments from their perspective. Moreover, when we look at history from this perspective, a lot of the unique light is shed on history because people who have been oppressed have quite unique insights into the past problems and crises of any particular society. So, for instance, we could not possibly understand European modernity without the narrative of slave accounts, without understanding the whole problem of slavery and colonialism, specifically first-hand narrations and just the history of it in general. We could not understand the fact of patriarchy without the feminist perspective and women's voices throughout history. And so, building on these ideas, I've tried to develop this from the ultimate victim of history, the ultimate loser, if you will, the ultimate conquered. And this is the animals, because the animals, I hate to play a quantification game, but the animals have suffered more than any other being on Earth. They suffered more qualitatively and they suffered more quantitatively. After all, we have a situation right now on the planet where 7 billion people kill 60 billion animals every year just for food consumption alone. So we're talking about astronomical figures, and we add that up through history. The numbers are staggering. So if we were to look at history, you can imagine from the animal standpoint, what could we learn? What could we learn about the causes of war? What could we learn about colonialism? What could we learn about Auschwitz and concentration camps? What could we learn about how violence is embedded so deeply into our minds, our psyches, our hearts, and our communities? What can we learn about hierarchy, about how sexism and racism and ableism actually come from the oppression of animals in some important ways? Well, as I'm suggesting, we could learn quite a bit. So if we look at history from the animal standpoint, by that I mean not literally looking at history from what a cat or dog might have said. Obviously, that's impossible. But from how we have treated animals, from how we have co-evolved and interrelated with animals, and in this sense, two ways, positively, animals have played such an important part in our psyches, in our evolution, in the development of our minds, and development of our spirituality. And unfortunately, there's a negative side, too. We have oppressed animals ever since domestication, which began with the origins of agriculture 10,000 years ago. For 10,000 years, we have developed the technologies and the conceptual framework for dominating animals, and everything we have done to animals, we have also done to each other. So if we look at history from the animal standpoint, we can really understand it in radically new ways. Just to finish here, and I'll let you ask another question. Marx said that communism is the answer to the riddle of history. Well, history is somewhat of a riddle, and it takes many perspectives to unravel its complexity. But and I'm a leftist, but I wouldn't say communism is the answer to the riddle. There's no one answer, first of all. But if we look at the animal standpoint, we can, which is very rarely done, and I'm happy to say there's a lot of exciting new scholarship coming out around this point, this perspective. If we look at history from the animal perspective, we will understand things that remain hidden to us. We will have utterly new insights on pathological problems and the crises in human civilization.
Okay. Very interesting. At the conference, actually, I remember you told me that you were planning to go to England, and but my understanding is you've been banned there. But yet you were planning to go, so I'm wondering whatever happened to that. I don't know if they let you in or you weren't able to.
I did make the attempt. I was banned from England in 2006. I was almost banned in 2005. They banned 3 American animal rights activist colleagues of mine. And they wrote me a warning letter saying that we are strongly considering banning you. We're going to let you in 2006 in order to speak at a conference. Basically, we'll be watching what you're saying. So I try to be on my best behavior and not be too inflammatory or radical. And actually, what happened was I was misquoted. I said something that was taken out of context, and it made page 3 of the Independent, which is one of the major papers in England. So I knew that it was over. I knew that when I got back home, well, the rest of my days in England would be the last days I'd spend there. When I got back home, sure enough, I got a letter from the Home Office. And the Home Office said, well, you were quoted as saying this, and we have various other quotes to you saying other things that we find to be radical, controversial, inflammatory, and promoting violence, etc. And so we consider you a threat to the public order, and you are hereby banned from the entire UK, which is 4 countries, of course, for the rest of your life, and this is non-negotiable. So that was 2005. And I wrote them back. I said, you are the threat to the public order because you promote the vivisection industries, which are the 3rd leading contributor to your economy. And so long as you support the slaughter, the meaningless, purposeless slaughter of millions of animals in the most hideous dungeons and laboratories every year, there will never be peace in your society because there is no peace until there is justice. And, of course, England is rocked from wall to wall with a powerful animal rights movement. And to stop that movement, they have banned foreign people like me, and they put their own good people in jail. So I told them that they are the threat to the public order, and this is absolute nonsense. And as soon as you start banning philosophers, you're on a slippery slope to a fascist police state. There's no question about it. I have to emphasize at this point that I have no criminal record. I've never been involved with the underground movement, such as the Animal Liberation Front. I defend it. I support it. I say controversial things, indeed, in my writings. But that is my right. In fact, that is my job. That is my duty as a philosopher, is to try to be provocative, to try to provoke thinking, and to try to provoke just conversation and discussion. So I wanted to challenge this ban. There had been 2 new governments since the Tony Blair government, which instantiated the ban, and I thought that maybe there was a chance that there was some liberalization going on in England. So I didn't try to sneak into the country. I told them, I wrote the Home Office 2 letters, and I sent out 2 press releases to all the UK media, and I said, look, I'm coming into England on June 10th. I'm going to arrive at this airport at this particular time, and I'm going to be giving speeches at these following places and at these following times. So I wanted them to know exactly when and where I was coming in and when and where I was appearing, because I wanted them to make a choice. Are you moving towards democracy? Will you rescind these absurd policies of banning philosophers, or are you going to perpetuate yourself as a fascist police state? Well, my answer was received on June 10th. I was in Gdansk, Poland. I was trying to board a plane from Poland to the UK. As soon as I got to the ticket line at the Polish airport, the Polish agent got on the phone immediately, and I already knew what was happening. She called her supervisor. Her supervisor, and I have to insist, to emphasize, these were Polish airport employees. These were not UK police agents. They were Polish people, and they told me that I was not allowed to fly into the UK because they were enforcing a lifetime ban against me. So I was never able to make it to the UK. So in anticipation of that, I recorded a video, which anyone can find on YouTube or any other or similar sites online. And it's basically my reply to the UK government. And I started off by saying, to an audience, and actually a live audience came. Of course, they were disappointed I wasn't there to speak in person. But I said, if you're seeing this, if you're watching me on tape, then you know, and there is absolutely no doubt that you live in a police state. And so I was able to appear actually still in England via videotape. I then appeared on Skype and had a live talk with the audience after that. So they were, in fact, unable to keep me out, but they were successful at perpetuating the ban. So again, when you ban academics, when you ban philosophers, when you ban people with no criminal records, simply because you don't like their ideas, you have set some very dangerous precedents for your country. The irony is that England used to be the haven of freedom. I recall that Voltaire in the 18th century fled France seeking safe harbor in England and praised the amount of civil liberties in England compared to the repression in France. I recall that in the 19th century, Karl Marx was kicked out of country to country in Europe, including his own Germany, and he found safe shelter in England, and he spent the last few decades of his life in London. So this is a country that once harbored radical intellectuals, and obviously since 9/11 and the whole police state fervor and madness that has happened in the U.S. and the U.K., because they've taken full advantage of this so-called war on terror, which really is a war on democracy. And they've used this to suppress all dissent. So I don't know which is a bigger police state. It's kind of comparing apples and oranges. But the U.S. and the U.K. are definitely up there with China and North Korea as the world's some of the world's leading police states, and England recently proved it.
The U.S. also bans political thinkers from coming into the United States. Foreign thinkers. So it's an amazing. We call ourselves a democracy, and yet you can't come in and give talks to people about ideas that are supposed to be yours and free for you to say what you think.
It's really quite amazing because it's actually a double-sided repression. On the one hand, I can't go to speak, I can't go to meet my friends, I can't go to the places and the parks and the pubs and some of the great public squares that I used to love to visit. I can't do that again, and I'll probably never be able to do that in my life, and that makes me sad.
Yeah.
On the other hand, the people from England can't hear me. They can hear me on videotape or some such thing, but they can't hear me. They can't hear me live. They can't hear me speak person to person before a live audience, and I find that appalling. And you're right. The U.S. has some very similar policies. Anywhere I go in the world, I ask people, "Have you been to the U.S.? Would you like to visit the U.S.?" And many people either say, "No, I have no particular desire to visit the U.S.," or they say, "I would like to visit the U.S., but it's so damn hard to get into the U.S. from the visa process, they don't let many people in." One of the last books I published was on academic repression, the phenomenon of the lack of free speech inside so-called higher education throughout the United States. And I have some stories, there are 37 contributions from different authors, and these include South African writers. And these are intellectuals who, like me, are not criminals, but are political or public intellectuals, may be controversial, but they weren't allowed into the U.S. And people who are political that comes from other countries without criminal records, they're not allowed into the U.S. to speak at conferences. So often people who hold international conferences want to make sure that people can come. Well, they have to go to Canada, and they often won't take the chance of holding the conference in the U.S. because the U.S. is such a repressive police state, too.
Yeah. Well, going from an international discussion to more local and national, I read an article you wrote in Negotiation is Over. The article was called Earth to Vegans. It was really interesting. You said in that article, vegans, please can the victory speeches and facile head-in-the-sand optimism, we're losing the war badly. You further said, we need radically new and innovative strategies. Our tactics so far are a miserable failure. We have pushed elitist, apolitical, and quasi-racist agendas. We preach to a minuscule crowd of the converted and ignore the masses of people who are poor, of color, struggling, working families, plagued with health problems, etc. Now, this is in response to a recent report by World Watch Institute that showed that meat production is rising dramatically. They said in 2007, there were 270 million tons produced. In 2008, 280. And by 2050, it's estimated to be 460 million tons. So I'm assuming this is what you were responding to when you wrote this article. And I have to say I agree very strongly with a lot of what you said. But can you kind of expound on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I am a vegan. I've been a vegan for 18 years. I've been a vegetarian for some 30 years. So it's not like I'm a critical outsider opposed to veganism. This is an internal critique. And I have to say that for the most part, the vegan movement I find deplorable and an abject failure. And we're not only failing because we haven't made it into TV advertising or because we're being repressed or some such situation. I think mostly we're failing because we are operating with limited and highly flawed assumptions and models. One of the things that I see all the time that I absolutely am nauseated by is every day when I go on Facebook, and I'm not a Facebook activist, you know, I go on to do some communication and actually try to make connections between the power of the digital realm and you know the need for traditional actions in the streets and for just being political in traditional ways. I don't consider signing petitions on Facebook political. But every time I go on Facebook, you know, and I read the news wall, I see the same damn thing every day, and I see it 10 or 20 times over. People are congratulating themselves on being a vegan. And they're saying, what a great world it would be if everyone were vegan. And aren't we great people because we're vegan? And, you know, pity the people who are not vegan. And all of these self-congratulatory, complacent remarks that I find nauseating because the movement has so far to go. The movement is so limited. The movement is so clearly a failure. Hang on, I have some cat fights going on there. This is a live production here. You can't get it out. Sorry. Okay. So the movement is clearly a failure. It's a failure in a couple of senses. Number one, we're so marginalized. In the U.S., the vegans are less than 1% of the population. We're at 300 million people in this country. We're less than 1% of the population. And I think vegetarians are, 2 to 3% of the population. One of the reasons why we're marginalized is we don't know how to reach out. We haven't reached out to the poor, to families, to the sick, to people in need. We haven't gone into the inner cities. For us, vegan outreach means that we go on college campuses, which are often diverse in composition, but we largely hand out pamphlets to white or certainly middle-class privileged people. We don't get to the people that we really need to get. And the messages of these pamphlets rarely emphasize the economics of veganism. One of the things you hear often from people of color or poor people, and when you try to talk to them about going vegan, is that, well, I can't afford a vegan diet. Well, a vegan diet is more affordable than a meat-based diet. That's been proven by various studies. That's, of course, if you don't buy the gourmet luxury items. But if you buy in bulk and you eat whole foods, it's affordable. So we failed in that sense, and I think the movement is racist by default. I say by default because there aren't racists in the vegan movement, not that I'm aware of. And if they are, they're not tolerated. They're properly kicked out of the room, or kicked out of conferences, and they should be booted the hell out because it's intolerable. But I think the movement is racist by default because it is largely white, privileged middle or upper class people. And these are people who don't consider the issue of color or the issue of poverty important enough to take seriously. So I think they're racist and elitist and classist by default. And the other problem that vegans are ignoring is how badly we are losing this war to save the planet, this war to save animals from the animal holocaust, the ongoing animal holocaust. Over the years, meat consumption has been steadily growing. And you go on Facebook and elsewhere, and people are acting as if they're winning, as if a new product on the shelf of Whole Foods or a new dish in a uptown New York cafe is a victory. Well, let me tell you something. We are making some progress. We're getting some more vegans. We're getting more celebrity support for whatever that's worth. We are getting more vegan products into foods, et cetera. There's some progress. But this progress is so dwarfed by the regress, by the spike in meat, dairy, and egg consumption, particularly in the world's two largest and most populous countries, and I'm talking about China and India. Now, China is just one country. It has 1.2 or 3 billion people. It's about 1/6 of the world's population. And China is moving from a plant-based to a meat-based diet. The United States has 300 million people in it. 300 million people comprise the middle class of China. The middle class. Have you ever heard the statement, well, the earth can't afford another United States? Well, guess what? We already have another United States in the 300 million people that comprise the middle class of China. And China is modernizing, and part and parcel of modernization is moving from a plant-based to a meat-based diet. So this is another catastrophe. And the same thing is happening to India, and India is expected to overtake China within a decade or so as the world's most populous country. So we are losing ground, and we are losing this war badly. And the meat and dairy and egg industries and the agribusiness corporations in general are making huge inroads in South Africa, in Brazil.
All of Africa, actually.
Countries. Yes, okay, all of Africa. Thank you. They're making huge inroads. And you know what? Nobody in the vegan movement is talking about it. And so what I'm finding in the vegan movement, besides these other problems I've mentioned, is mass denial. The head in the sand problem. There's a less polite term for it. This mass denial. I find that most people in the United States or anywhere in the world will not confront the severity of the ecological crisis. In 1989, the world scientists began to warn the people of the Earth that the planet Earth is in a state of emergency. This was in 1989, and they've been warning us ever since. And when there is a world consensus by the world's best scientists, and they are telling us that this crisis is growing and deepening and unfolding at a more rapid pace than even the most conservative ones thought possible, we better listen. So nobody in the vegan movement is talking about China. No one's talking about India. No one's talking about the growth of agribusiness. Everyone is applauding themselves on the back as if they're winning the war. We are losing the war, and we are beginning decimated.
Dr. Best,
I hate to be the pessimist, but I'm going to be the one to speak the truth here and to shake the complacency out of this movement.
Well, for what it's worth, I do agree with you in general, but I have to say there is one little organization that's part of the vegan movement. It's called International Fund for Africa, and we are screaming about this. Every conference I go up to, I'm talking about this and telling people the same thing you're saying. I'm talking about the growth of factory farming in Africa, and all my speeches have been about that and about the fact that the movement is all white. I'm a black guy from Africa, and every conference I go to, I'm one out of, maybe 1 or 2 out of 1,000 people that are there that are not Caucasian. So what you're telling me is something that I am feeling every day, that I know about. And so, we as an organization are trying to get people to understand that this issue of veganism and, our self-congratulatory process is dangerous.
Here, Dr. Roba. Thank you so much for saying that. And Dr. Best, I apologize. We are out of time, but this has been such a fascinating conversation. I know we're wanting to have you back in September. Come back on?
I'd be glad to.
Fantastic.
And thank you for pointing that out. I didn't mean to...
oh, no. I know. Don't...
Vegans are misguided, but it is a phenomenon, and it is a vast majority.
No,
it's just a handful of people who are pointing out the real problem.
I'm really... I can't tell you how happy I am to have you talk about this issue. And, you're a very, very prolific speaker, great speaker, and you make good points. And I'm pleased to be able to say the same things that you've been saying for decades.
Thank you again, gentlemen, both. Our guest for this evening and my co-host has been Dr. Anthony Roba. You can find out more about his information, International Fund for Africa, at ifundafrica.org. And Dr. Best, can you give us your website?
Sure. You can go to drstevebest.com and drstevebestwordpress.com.
Excellent. Thank you both, gentlemen. And until we can have you on again.